Hi guys, I hope you guys are doing well and welcome next to another episode. This is a new journey that we'll be carrying together as we reinvent the wheel and we share beautiful stories of being in the channel. Kindly subscribe. This is MC Mtali's channel. My name is Kennedy, the storyteller, whereby I'll be giving you many insight. So, one question I'm asking: when was it a crime to be a black? When was it a crime to why are we always judged by our race? So the US system has been designed in a way that it's biased, whereby the blacks are usually down upon. It is yet we aren't yet to achieve the freedom that we think we are achieved. Yes, USA is a superpower whereby it has lots of opportunity. The American dream, where many people have been designed, but there's a man known as Tim Wise who has another opinion and he enlightens us. Let's kindly let's watch the video and I'll be back to give my point of view. You can always be part and parcel of this movement. Always subscribe and you can always give your an honest opinion if you still believe if that's true. Let's watch the video.
A new analysis suggests that many Black Americans believe the racial bias in U.S. institutions is not merely a matter of passive negligence. It is the result of intentional design. Specifically, large majorities describe the systems in the U.S., such as prison, 74%, political, 67%, and economic, 65%, among others, as having been designed to hold Black people back, either a great deal or a fair amount. Black Americans' distrust of U.S. institutions is informed by history, from slavery to the implementation of Jim Crow laws in the South, to the rise of mass incarceration, and more. However, Black Americans were never really alone in this solemn exposition.
Let me say that again. The whole history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another or they're going to rise up and take our stuff.
In that sea of silence, where most who are called white would look away.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, isn't that? Spitting slow, spitting fast, I could roast, I could gas. Think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past. And the pettiness, a reflection of the emptiness. Hilarious, you think you're worth my time, you're delirious. Mysterious, because you hide behind a fake exterior. Inferior, you know I'll always be a bit superior. Get off of me, this ain't no humble brag. I want you to hear words, you can say them back. I want you to feel free from the chains at last, and to believe in what you got, it was built to last, yeah.
Now that I've been put through hell, I never got anyone's help. I had to do it all myself.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
Gonna learn the consequence of being incompetent. Mental health is confidence, dreams and some modestness. I'm not here to save the day, that's for you to take away. I could play a million mind games, but instead I say something not illogical, something that is topical. Rub it on and watch it go, make yourself unstoppable. Dreams are irresponsible, but they're always possible. If you just believe, you could be so remarkable.
Thoughts in my head, a collage and they spread. I'll be great one day, going off of my meds. No, I'm not giving up, no, I'm not giving in. I will make it to the top, taking off in the wind. I gotta make it, I'm saving every day to taste it. I'm patient, but my mind, it can hardly take it. I'm chasing a dream that I've had for several ages. A vacant, modern kingdom for the taking.
Now that I've been put through hell, I never got anyone's help. I had to do it all myself.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
And to stop almost instantly. Fast forward to the Civil War era, you have rich white folks in the South, where I come from, standing up and openly admitting that the reason they're prepared to secede from the Union, and the only reason they ever articulated publicly, ever, was to maintain and extend slavery and white supremacy not only where it already existed, but into the newly acquired, that is to say, stolen territories from Mexico to the West. That was what they said. Now we lie about it. We say it wasn't about slavery, that it was about states' rights. Yes, the right of the states to keep and maintain slaves, exactly. But back then they had no shame, so they didn't try and cover it up. They openly said it, but once again, the rich didn't want to go do the work. Are you kidding? No, they're going to get poor people to go fight for them. And the poor folks didn't even own slaves. Now think, how do you get poor people who don't even own the shirt on their back, let alone slaves, to go fight to keep your slaves for you? You've got to convince them that their skin is more important than their economic interest. Because think about it, if I am a farmer who has to charge you $1 a day or $2 a week to work on your farm and harvest that tobacco or pick that cotton, but you can get a black person to do it for free because you own them, who's going to get the job? Not me. In other words, slavery actually undermined the wages and the wage base, the economic floor of the typical white working class or low income person. But they were told, if these people are freed, they're going to take your job. No, fool, they got your job. That's the point. And so at some level, again, working class white people being harmed by white privilege, relatively being advantaged, right? Being given a leg up, being given a membership to the club, but in absolute terms being kept economically subordinated by the very thing that gave them a sense of superiority. How's that for irony? Then in the present era, this hasn't stopped. This is not ancient history. Now we have people running around insisting that we should close the border with Mexico because if we don't, The wages of working class people will continue to fall. The implication being that the only reason workers are paid like crap in this country is because the border is open. But if you believe that, you would actually have to believe that if that border were closed, that all these owners of capital and industry would just say, oh, well, you figured us out. Here, it's a raise. Do we really percent of the white folks in St. Bernard Parish voted for David Duke, white supremacist neo-Nazi, former head of the largest Ku Klux Klan group in the United States when he ran for governor in 1991. 7 out of 10 gladly voted for him because he was blaming black folks for all of their problems, and they bought it. What's the irony? The irony is that while a blood relative. Now I'll leave it to your imagination as to why you'd want to pass a law. That law had never existed before. But now that it's been emptied out and you don't know who might come back, that's a damn good way to keep black people out, isn't it? Because if you're 95% white to begin with, if you pass an ordinance that says that, that's a great, you can't say no blacks need apply. You can't say no blacks allowed, but that was an ingenious way to get around the law. Now they got caught. There was a lawsuit threatening, they got rid of the ordinance. But my point in bringing it up is to say, once again, divide and conquer is working. These white folks in Chalmette need to march across that canal and join hands with the black folks who've been sitting there more than willing to work with them for an awful long time, and march on Baton Rouge and march on DC and march on the Corps of Engineers and recognize their commonality of interest. But the whiteness and the lure of whiteness has tricked these have nothing in their bank account white people into believing that they got more in common with the rich white folks on St. Charles Avenue that didn't lose anything in that flooding than they have in common with the black working class folks who live about 500 yards away.
Supporting Tim Wise's claims, several studies show that racial disparities in income, wealth, education, imprisonment, and health outcomes persist to this day. The beliefs and narratives that black Americans have about institutional harm have long been studied by scholars in the health and social sciences and the humanities. Narratives about how institutions were designed to hold black people back also surfaced in several of the online focus groups Pew Research Center conducted with this study just last year. To measure the prevalence of these narratives of mistrust, they would conduct a survey of 4,736 black adults in the U.S. from September 12th to September 24th, 2023. First respondents were asked if they had ever heard a series of statements about how U.S. institutions might intentionally or negligently harm black people. Respondents were then asked if they thought these harms were also happening to black people today. Here are some key findings about black Americans' beliefs in institutional mistrust. 76% of black adults say black public officials today are singled out to be discredited in a way that doesn't happen to white public officials. 76% say police today do very little to stop guns and drugs from flooding black communities. 74% say black people are more likely than white people to be incarcerated because prisons want to make money on the backs of black people today. 67% of black Americans say businesses today target marketing of luxury products to black people in order to put them into debt. 55% of black adults say secret and non-consensual medical experiments, like the Tuskegee study, are happening to black people today. 55% of black adults say the government today encourages single motherhood and the elimination of black men from black families. 51% of black adults say the government promotes birth control and abortion to reduce the size of the black population, and this is happening today. The report also finds that black Americans who have experienced racial discrimination are more likely to believe U.S. institutions intentionally or negligently harm black people. There are also modest differences among black Americans by gender, education, family income, and political affiliation. Still, majorities across many black demographic subgroups are familiar with these statements about the intentions of many U.S. institutions and say these things are happening to black people today. However, Tim Wise would not hesitate to stand up front, opening the eyes of his white contemporaries to the truth of the daily perpetual policies of inequality and black exclusive stereotypes, which white contemporaries would normally look away from. This was him in the Rock Newman Show 9 years ago.
The reason white folks get defensive about the conversation is if you say we're going to talk about racism, white Americans think you're getting ready to call them racist. And that's not what we're not talking about individual racists. I, for one, don't care if Darren Wilson is a racist. What I care about is a culture of policing that engenders the abuse of black and brown people, even among cops who are not bigots. Like, he could be a Boy Scout. He could be a great guy. They had this conversation when George Zimmerman killed Trayvon. And I realized George Zimmerman, technically a Latino, but pretty white identified in terms of his character and who he hangs out with and all that. Here's a guy, they said, well, he's not a racist. He dated a black girl, took her to prom, mentored black children. It doesn't matter, because he is internalizing the same messages from the media, from the schools that we all are. So we don't have to feel guilty.
What are those messages?
Those messages are that black men are dangerous, because if you look at the news, there have been studies on this. Local news overrepresents black folks as perpetrators, overrepresents white folks as victims. So the message that gets sent is they're dangerous, and specifically to you.
Who are changing the world, Tim Wise was among the most prominent anti-racist writers and educators in the United States. He has spent the past 25 years speaking to audiences in all 50 states in the U.S.
So far, this colorblind response, this post-racial response that says, oh, let's not name that elephant. Let's not call out what it is we're seeing. Let's redefine it. The most powerful man in the world, arguably, but he can't even name what is obvious. He can't even call it out for what it is. You can't criticize yelling at a cop is not, in fact, disorderly conduct. Not a smart idea. I don't recommend it, but it is not illegal. So when they arrested danger in therefore deciding we're not going to talk about this systemic injustice anymore because we got to protect him.
Wise has appeared on more than 1,500 college and high school campuses, also at hundreds of professional and academic conferences, and before community groups nationwide in his war against racism. He is, in fact, a prophetic voice in this generation on a mission to reform the white mindset and stereotypes on blacks worldwide.
Critical race theory was created in the late 70s and early 1980s, and no one said anything about it, right? No one really cared outside of sort of picayune debates in law schools, which is where critical race theory is principally applied. So why would all of a sudden it become necessary to attack critical race theory? Because the timing coincides with this uprising, and the idea is to shut down any conversation about racial injustice in America. Because you don't want those white folks to become allies. You don't want those white folks to act in solidarity. You don't want them to learn the truth about the history of the country. And you say it's because you're trying to protect their feelings. That's what they say, right? We don't want white folks to feel bad about being white. Nobody's trying to make anybody feel bad about being white. But if that is your concern, there's a really easy solution. Teach about some different white people. Right? If you're feeling guilty about white folks, and maybe you just need to focus a little less on Andrew Jackson and a little bit more on people like Jeremiah Everts, who was a white man who's one of his principal opponents to indigenous removal. Because there were white folks who stood up against that mess. There were white folks who joined the abolitionist struggle, whose names we don't know. Lydia Marie Child, the Grimke sisters, John Fee, an abolitionist preacher who was defrocked from his church by the Presbyterian Synod because he refused to minister to slaveholders, founded Berea College in Kentucky. Right? Why don't we know these people's names? Why don't we teach these white anti-racist allies who acted in solidarity with black peoples? Right? Because if you're concerned that anti-racists like me are trying to make white people feel bad about being white, and I'm telling you, no, there are these other role models that we could have. Why don't you want to teach about them? That would be the solution to white guilt, right? You don't have to feel guilt and shame when you know you got a choice to make. And here are these examples of people who made that choice. Joan Trump-Auer Mulholland in the civil rights struggle, Bob and Dottie Zellner, Connie Curry, Virginia Foster Durr. Like, I could go down this list, all these names of people who have fought. Some of them died for the cause of racial equity. There haven't been enough of us. I mean, there have been enough who've died, don't get me wrong, I didn't mean it that way. But there haven't been enough of us who joined in solidarity, but we've always been there. Why don't we learn about those folks in school, see? The people that attack critical race theory don't talk about doing that. They don't want that taught. They just don't want race talked about at all. They don't want us to deal with what's real. So it's never too young to start. Seventh. You do it first, right? So you might think to yourself, well, gosh, I don't know, Tim, maybe the first thing they did was make sure that they had a sufficient army in case the Brits decided to come back and have another run at it. No, that's not what they did. Or you might say, well, maybe they needed to figure out the tax structure so they could figure out how to finance the government. So maybe they did that first. No. They did that, but they didn't do that first. Right. The very first substantive piece of legislation that Congress passed after the Constitution was ratified was a thing called the Naturalization Act of 1790. It's not something we learn about in history class, very many of us in high school. I certainly didn't. And I was in AP history, which they say is the history for the smart kids. Right? But they apparently didn't think we were smart enough to handle this truth, even in the 1980s, let alone now with all this backlash happening. What did the Naturalization Act of 1790 say? The first thing that Congress decided to take care of. What did it say? It said that all free white persons and only free white persons could be citizens of the United States. In other words, the most important order of business in the mind of the founders and the first Congress was to make sure that everybody understood, before we dealt with the army, before we dealt with taxes, before we dealt with tariffs, before we dealt with any of the economic stuff, just make sure y'all know that this new thing here is for us and only us. And nobody who is not white will be considered a citizen of the United States. That tells me that white supremacy is there at the birth, right? It, of course, was there before that, really going back to the colonial period. But I'm just saying, in the actual history of the country's laws, it's there from the beginning. Again, not an opinion. There is no rebuttal to what I just said. It happened, and it reads exactly as I say it reads, with the intention that I suggest it had. So then the question is, do we understand what the legacy of that kind of germ of white supremacy is? Do we just assume that that doesn't matter, that it doesn't bear fruit, right? Do we assume that the policies that flowed from that assumption about who could be a citizen and who couldn't, that those policies would create damage perhaps in their own time but not in ours? As if somehow you just flick a switch, you pass a law, and all of the inertia of the past several generations goes away?
With unflinching honesty, Wise did uncover the deeply buried secrets of America.
Come on, y'all, it's 1963. We know the answer. This is before the Civil Rights Act, before the Voting Rights Act, before the Fair Housing Act. It is the year of the March on Washington, the year that Medgar Evers is shot down dead in his driveway in Jackson, Mississippi, the year that Governor Wallace stands in the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama and says, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. It is the year that he turns those dogs and water cannons in Birmingham on those children at the behest of Bull Connor. So we know the answer to the question. This is not a hard pop quiz. The answer is one is that white folks are just so stupid and ignorant and cold-hearted that they just can't see with the Pledge of Allegiance or the national anthem, and then it just was like gray matter for like 6 hours until it came back on. So the idea that you could have somehow missed what was happening in Birmingham, missed what was happening in Mississippi, missed what was happening during the March on Washington, 200,000 people on the mall down the road, right? How could you miss it? It's not like I'm sorry, I was watching Netflix. No, you weren't. You were watching Walter Cronkite because it's all there was.
He relentlessly urged the white nation in general to quit racial injustice and stand up for what's right and just.
Even when people are generally very progressive in the way that they think about a number of social issues. When we talk about race and we talk about racism, we almost always focus on the other, right? Those who were different from the dominant norm, whatever the dominant norm may be. So we put the spotlight on them and therefore the pressure. We put the attention on them and therefore the pressure. We may ask, for instance, what's wrong with them? And how can we fix them? How can we bring them, whoever they may be, into the mainstream of the economy? How can we bring them into the mainstream of the economic and educational systems? How can we make their lives better? And what do we need to know about them so as to help them improve their lives? But the underlying assumption of all of those statements and all of those things, even if they are well-intended and sound nice, the underlying assumption of all of them is that the deficit is to be found in the marginalized population, that they are the ones with the deficit, that they are the ones who need to be fixed. But what if the deficit is in the dominant culture and we're just not paying attention to that? What if the conditions of life experienced by marginalized populations, whether First Nations peoples here in Canada, whether Indigenous and First Nations peoples in the United States, or African Americans or Latinos in the United States, whoever it is, there's a big difference between guilt and responsibility, after all. Guilt is something you feel for what you've done, and responsibility is something you take because of the kind of person that you are. They're not, strictly speaking, synonyms. And so when we inherit the legacy, not of 36-and-a-half-hour-old gumbo, but the legacy of institutionalized racial and ethnic discrimination, oppression, privilege, and subordination, when we inherit the legacy of sexism and patriarchal oppression, the legacy of economic injustice, the legacy of straight supremacy, all the different forms of supremacy and oppression and suppression that exist within our cultures all across the globe, when we inherit those, and on this continent, we inherit that legacy of white supremacy. Let us be clear. Let us name it and call it what it is. We inherit a legacy of white supremacy. We have to be responsible for how we find it, not because we are to blame for having created it, but because we're the only ones left to do it, you see. We have to take responsibility for things as we find them, even if we don't create them. At least in theory, that's what we do with ecological destruction and environmental damage. You and I did not individually, I assume, go and belch toxic waste into the air, inject it into the soil, dump it into the waters on this planet, but somebody did, and we're now living with it. So we either clean it or we can sit around and say, well, I didn't do it, I'm innocent, it really wasn't me, you can't blame me. But that doesn't really take care of the problem. If you ever become the CEO of a corporation, I don't know why you'd want to, but if you do, you won't be able to come in on the first day of work and say to your board of directors, I can't wait to make use of all the assets you people were able to get before I came on board, all the assets you were able to develop, all the revenue you were able to generate. I can't wait to take advantage of that. But as for all those outstanding debts that you ran up, like your bills and the loans that you took out so that you could grow the company, no, I don't have any intention of paying those. That was the last CEO. You really should have gotten him or her to do that. I'm new, I'm innocent, I just got here, you see. There's a difference between guilt and responsibility.
Tim Wise's courageous call to action challenges the white nation to abandon racial injustice and champion equality. His words would always be an inspiration to collective awakening, mobilizing the nation toward a future where every individual has equal opportunities to thrive.
What a really good insight that Tim Wise has really shown us. So the system isn't really up for us. The whites have literally designed a way whereby they want to put down the Black Americans. What an insight by Tim White, but it tells us something about there's still some good people in this world whereby they see and they give us insight. We aren't here to judge. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to say that we are all equal when given the right platform. Please, one shouldn't be judged based on their skin color. One should be given an opportunity. Why do we usually judge? Why does the system have to always be like this? Can we not always be given the right opportunity? Why is the system not yet made for us? So Team Wise has really given us an insight, and through that we tend to learn a lot, especially all every year we tend to see the green card application. I know back in Africa, everything is usually a challenge, especially the way we fed. So the American dream is usually there, but yeah, if these insights aren't given to us, we couldn't know. So I'll urge many people, if the dream is still go, you can always go, but have knowledge, because knowledge supersedes a lot. So I can't stop but agree, not more, with Team Wise. If you still agree with Team Wise, you can always leave a comment. Give us what's your opinion. Let's share. Comment down. Tell a friend to tell a friend. This is the YouTube channel with the best insights, and thank you for your support, and I'll really appreciate. My name is Van Kennedy Umbua. Subscribe to MC Mtali's channel, and we can't wait to see the next video. Thank you. Adios. Toodles. Thank you. Always subscribe, leave a like and comment. Thank you.